Good evening, everyone. My name is Beth Anderson, and I'm the Executive Director at Hill Learning Center in Durham, North Carolina. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us for our final Community Education Series event of the school year. It was really fun to see the names popping up of the participants as you all were entering the Zoom room. I saw current parents, I saw several alumni parents and names that I haven't seen in a while, and lots of names that I didn't recognize. And so just want you all to be welcome to join us here this evening. For those who are not familiar with Hill, we are a K-12 education nonprofit that exists because mainstream instructional practices too often do not serve all students, including those with both diagnosed and undiagnosed learning differences. Our ambitious vision is that all students with learning and attention challenges receive the instruction and support they need, regardless of where they attend school or whether they have a formal diagnosis. We pursue this vision through a range of student and educator programs and knowledge and field building efforts that reach students and educators in Durham and beyond. And if you haven't already, please check out our website at hillcenter.org. Through this community education series, we aspire to offer free, practical, research-based strategies to help students, as well as the parents, teachers, family members, and professionals who support them. As a parent whose son will be making the transition to college next year, tonight's topic is especially relevant and top of mind for me. It's an exciting yet stressful time, even more so as we continue to navigate this pandemic that has disrupted both the high school and college experience for our own children. This is especially true for students with learning differences and ADHD, who are more likely to have executive function challenges and to need to advocate for themselves in new and different ways and spaces and find that right fit for them. Whether you're here as a parent, a student, or a professional, or another interested friend or family member, we hope that the information that we share tonight is useful and perhaps can help reduce some of your anxiety or any of those tensions that might sometimes surface in your household around this college process. So thank you for being here. Before introducing our speaker, let me cover a few housekeeping details. First of all, this session is being recorded. The recording will be sent out tomorrow along with a short survey. Please complete the survey. Your feedback is very important to us in developing future sessions. We will be planning a series for next year, and we want to keep meeting the needs of our broad community. There's also a link to the slide presentation in the chat, and the slides will be included in tomorrow's email. So feel free to click on those and check out the slides, as well as a handout that's included this time as well. All of our participants are muted, but you can submit questions and comments to the presenter and the Hill team at any time using chat. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask our presenter during the Q&A and you want to share it, go ahead and do so now. And or at any time, really, through the presentation. And also, if you're having technical difficulties, please don't hesitate to reach out. The chat is only visible to the presenter and our tech and support team, so you will not see what's in the chat, but we want to hear from you. Sarah will present for about an hour, and then we'll have a Q&A moderated by our Director of Professional Learning, Kathy Sullivan. So now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Sarah Carver-Williams. Dr. Williams is a member of Hill's Board of Directors, as well as the Executive Director for the Office for Faculty Excellence and the STEPP Program at East Carolina University. She is on faculty in the ECU College of Education, and she formerly worked as a special education teacher in the North Carolina public schools. She has her Ph.D. from UNC at Chapel Hill, go Heels, and a B.S. and M.A. degrees from ECU as well. Her research interests primarily involve applied research focused on learning about instructional strategies that influence effective learning environments for students with learning and attention differences, student strategies that increase learning outcomes, and the college experience for students with learning disabilities, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. She delivered a similar session at Hill several years ago, and it was incredibly well received by parents and students. So we are lucky and grateful to have Sarah as part of the Hill community and with us here tonight to share her expertise. So let me turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for letting me be here and be a part of this series, and in a small way connect to the wonderful work that the Hill Center does to support and empower students as they pursue their educational goals. The more I learn, the more remarkable I learn this work is. So thanks for having me. As Beth mentioned, my name is Sarah Williams. Hello, everyone. I work with the STEPP program at East Carolina University. We're in Greenville, North Carolina, and our program is designed to work with students who have identified learning disabilities as they transition to the college environment and as they work toward their degree. And so what that does is it gives us the opportunity to learn alongside really bright and talented students while they're majoring in whatever they want, and just really learn about their college experience right beside them. And it really is a learning process for all of our students. I'll say some students progress through that learning process more gracefully than others, but I'm happy to share with you, and I'll begin by sharing with you that most of them do. I know in the STEPP program specifically we have about a 93% retention rate with our students from year 1 to year 2, and about 86% of the students who have ever been in the program have graduated, or if they're still in the program, are on track to graduate. And so it is a process that if you're a student thinking about going to college, that you can navigate. And I hope that tonight will be helpful in terms of helping you think in that direction. Let me see if I can advance. So Beth and Kathy kind of asked me to address 4 broad questions tonight. What resources are available at universities to assist students with learning differences, talking a little bit about differences between high school and college environments and how students can think about planning for success, and then how can students know if a college is a good fit for them. And those are big topics. So I have lots of takeaways from our experiences with our students to share with you, or lots of things, hopefully seeds to plant for you to be thinking about. But first, I want to pause for a second. Before we even get started, I want you to take a minute and think, and if you will, just jot it down really quickly. 2 things. If you'll make a note about if you're a student getting ready to go to college or thinking ahead about college, what are you most excited about? Or if you're a parent, what are you most excited about for your student? Take a second and think about that and jot that down. Secondly, I want you to jot down, what are you most concerned about or maybe curious about? What kind of do you really want to learn more about in order to make a good decision about college, or what worries you a little bit? Take a minute and jot those 2 things down. And I just, as Beth mentioned, we'll have some time for questions a couple times this evening. And if I don't address those things, please do drop them in the chat at the end, and let's talk about them. Or if I don't know the answer right away, I'll at least try to find that and get back with the Hill team so we can follow up and really want to address what's pressing on your mind. Over the next hour or so, I'm going to be talking a lot about differences, a lot about contrasts between high school and college. And there are a lot of them, but I think throughout this evening, one of the things I just really want to emphasize is there's one very important overarching similarity, and that is there is support available in college environments for students, and really encouraging you to think about planning for tapping into as many of those supports as possible and knowing they're there. So many students here as they're planning for college, when you're in college, you're just going to be a number. Those universities are so big, you're just going to have to do it all on your own. And that's just absolutely not the case. I've worked surrounded by just hundreds of people, staff, faculty, students who just really are passionate about helping students succeed. And there are a lot of resources. And so I'll try to point you to some of those tonight. Also, I do want to say up front that I'll be talking kind of in sweeping generalities. And so just remembering that every single college is different. So, you know, what I say tonight about one college might not apply to other colleges. So really just dig in and do some research about all the different colleges you're interested in pursuing and learning more about, and finding out how each one is unique is going to be important for you. And then throughout, I'll try to sprinkle some transition tips. So I'll start with the first one. The first kind of transition tip I have to share with you, you're absolutely already doing. So congratulations, you're here and doing just that. You know, you can't begin too early thinking about college and planning for it and taking some steps to get ready, even just little practical steps as you start working toward that transition to college. And it's also never too late. So just be as proactive as you can wherever you are in that process. And hopefully tonight will give you some ideas for some tangible takeaways that you can get started with. So let's do that. Let's get started. Let's talk about getting ready for college. One of the things that I think some families use that is an incredibly helpful practice is they set aside time to plan for college. You know, maybe each week you have a college prep night where you know, pull out your favorite snacks and decide to spend anywhere from a half an hour to a couple of hours just working through conversations and explorations and material that can help you get ready for the college environment. Maybe you're filling out your essays, maybe, your applications. Maybe you're thinking about those essays. Maybe you're checking out Quala's websites. There are so many different resources. And one option is just to work through some of the resources I'm going to point to tonight. Absolutely everything that I share is covered in a whole lot more detail in these two resources. And as Beth mentioned, you'll have access to these slides that obviously have a link to those resources, as well as a handout to these two sources. And so don't feel like you have to notes or anything like that. You can get all of this information in these two places. The first is the College Bound Transition Curriculum. That's a curriculum that the STEPP program puts out. It's free and available on our website for you to download or work through. And basically, it's designed as a series of modules and activities. It's designed with families in mind, and it's something that with absolutely no advanced preparation, you can go to the website and you know, open one of these resources and talk through it and work to it together as a family. It'll point you to some resources, sometimes have some practice things to do, and it'll have conversation starters for students and their parents or guardians or college advising corps counselor or guidance counselor or teacher or transition specialist, hopefully some good conversations that you can have with others. And the second resource is a series of recordings from this past year's College Star Student Support Conference. College Star is a network of student support programs on campuses across the nation. And we come together to work together on lots of projects. And one of them is that we have started having an annual fall conference. And that conference this past fall was recorded. And it'll give you a chance to hear from people from different colleges across the nation on some of these topics. You'll also receive a handout that basically pulls together all the tips that I'm going to mention tonight in one place, and also links to those resources. So that'll come to you tomorrow, it sounds like. The first question is just what resources are available at universities to support students with learning differences. And the good news is there are lots of them. I think the biggest problem sometimes is far too few students take advantage of them. So definitely take the time to look into resources that are available on the colleges that you're exploring. So, you know, as you do that, though, as you do that kind of research, you'll probably find, in general, 3 different types or 3 different levels of support. And those are depicted on this slide. Every college is going to have those first 2 levels. Every college is going to have a a wide range of just general academic and non-academic supports for all students. And I'm going to talk about some examples of those in a minute. All colleges will also have a disability support services office. It's called different things on different campuses, but this is where students will be able to access basic accommodations that are freely available for students who have documented disabilities. And I'm going to go into kind of a lot of detail about disability support services in just a second. The third level of support is not available on all campuses, but it might be available more often than you think. Some colleges do have comprehensive programs that are available. A lot of times they're designed to support specific groups of students. Some of them may charge extra fees for services. Some of them may be limited in size. Some of them may be larger. Just there's a lot of variability. But definitely look for programs that are even more comprehensive than basic programs that are on, or services that are on any campus, if you to see if there are some out there that are a good fit for you. The ones on this screen are some examples of some that are on my radar, and they're on my radar because they're a part of that College Star network that I just mentioned. So if you go to that conference recording that I was talking about, you'll be able to see links to all of these programs, read a little bit more about them. Some of them even did little flash sessions at the conference where they told more about their programs and what they do. But these are great programs, and you can see there's a range from community colleges to two-year private colleges to large universities to smaller universities. Some are private, some are public. So there's just a good variety in terms of programs that are available. STEPP is the one I know most about. So, you know, I'm biased, but I actually have a lot of respect for all of these programs and encourage you to check them all out. Like I said, there'll be links on that College Star conference site that you'll receive tomorrow. So I want to talk a little bit though about supports that are just available to anyone on campus. And research has shown that students with learning differences who take advantage of supports like these, not even those comprehensive supports, just basic supports that are available to students on the college campus, do better than those who don't. Which feels kind of like a no-brainer that it took research to show that. But I mean, that is, on some level is pretty powerful, that just by taking advantage by support services that are right there available for you, you can increase things like your grades, your graduation rates, and that sort of thing. So definitely tap into these types of supports. Also, just kind of as a side note, if the college that you really, really want to go to or really, really need to go to for whatever reason doesn't have one of those comprehensive support programs, like we're on the slide a minute ago, you know, there are ways to connect the dots through these services and kind of construct for yourself a support network that can help you succeed. It takes advanced planning and it takes some intentionality, but that's something that that can be done and often is. So I'll just sort of give you some, talk a little bit about these. I'll talk about accommodations and disability support services in a minute, but want to encourage you to explore different types of technology that might be helpful for your learning. You may find in the college environment that there are technologies that can be used and taken advantage of in that setting that maybe you weren't able to use in high school or middle school. So your Disability Support Services Office will be a great place to explore different types of technology that you might find helpful, as will these other spaces, academic coaching, tutoring, mentoring. Most campuses have some version of those things. At ECU, we do have coaching and mentoring available to students and a wide variety of tutoring. We have a tutoring center. It's called the Pirate Academic Success Center because at ECU, all things lead to pirates. But it is an extraordinary center that provides peer tutoring and mentoring and all sorts of resources to students on a wide variety of disciplines. We also have an outstanding writing center, math tutoring available. We have a speech center on campus that provides support to students who want some extra help, you know, learning how to communicate and express themselves verbally, especially in like public speaking type situations. So most campuses are going to have a nice array of academic supports available. Research assistance. Most people are pretty surprised how much support is available in university libraries for students who need to find information, pull together research, and do those sometimes intimidating, daunting tasks as they prepare for their written assignments. But there's tremendous amounts of hands-on support in most libraries. Most campuses have a strong counseling center where most times they're fully credentialed, strong counselors in a lot of different areas about that pertain to mental health or wellness, and they're especially well versed in issues that affect students in college, and so it's definitely an important resource on campus, and has been especially over the past couple of years with the pandemic. Most people are familiar with advising that's available on all campuses to help students progress through their course of study. Campuses generally have a career counseling office. And a lot of students think, I'll connect with the career counselors when I'm getting ready to graduate and get a job. But actually, we encourage students to connect with the Career Center their freshman year. I mean, they're a tremendous resource for learning and having support with things about like how to talk about yourself, how to network, how to engage in conversations with a lot of different people. And that's going to come in very handy with some of the things I'll talk about later this evening, but also a great place to look at potential careers and think about what major and what experiences while I'm in college, internships, volunteer opportunities, jobs might really help me take advantage of these college years and be ready for what I'm looking for with life after college. And then that last bullet, networking and support. Any campus is going to just have a ton of ways to help students get plugged in and connected with one another, with faculty, with support programs. For example, at ECU, we've got over 300 clubs and organizations and intramurals and things like that, and ways for students to engage with other people who have like interests. And so it's really important to use all of those resources. They're there and available for students. The college-bound curriculum that I mentioned earlier in Module 4, they have a section called College Resources, and it really unpacks some of these services and supports, and may be helpful to you as you're thinking about tapping into these services. And also, both day 1 and 2 of the conference recordings have a lot of sessions about this. So those are some of the general supports. All campuses also are going to have a disability support services office, and that's a place for students who do have identified, documented disabilities that they can go and receive accommodations and support. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, but I really do want to say that I don't work for disability support services, and so and it's different on every campus. So I definitely encourage you to check into the Disability Support Services office on any campus that you're checking out and thinking about for college. And I kind of want to begin by saying, as you think about disability support services in college, the first step is kind of to forget what you know about disability support services in high school. Not completely, but to at least keep a mindset as you transition to the college environment, and as you help your student prepare to do that, that disability support in college is very different from disability support in high school. And one of the main reasons for that is the services in the two different environments are governed by completely different legislation. In high school, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act provides guidance for serving students with disabilities, in addition to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. In college, the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act are the main laws that provide guidance for governing students with disabilities. There's an additional law, the Family Educational Rights, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, that also kicks in college and sort of changes the dynamic a little bit about providing disability support to students. And that's important that's important to know, because these differences create, fundamental different missions and ways that students will interact with their disability support services providers. One's not better or worse or bad or good, they're just different. In high school, terminology that's used is a special education program or exceptional children. In college, that's going to be referred to as either disability support or access services. I'll also share that some disability support services office, in an effort to make sure that students don't feel stigma or embarrassment about connecting with their office, they call their office something a little bit more generic, a student success center. They use access a lot. And so sometimes it does take a little bit of looking to find where's that office, but just know it exists. So I will talk a little bit about some of the differences between disability support in a college environment versus a high school environment. The goal of special education in a high school setting or middle school or elementary setting is student success. Basically, everything in an IEP is constructed around helping a student be successful. That IEP is going to be reevaluated every year. Additional supports are going to be provided, or the plan is going to be adjusted and tweaked and modified if the student is not progressing like we feel like they should. In college, it's a little bit different. In college, the goal is access. And so disability support services is geared toward providing a student with reasonable accommodations for equal access for major life activities. And education is, of course, a major life activity. Basically, the legislation that guides our work is civil rights legislation that's designed to ensure that otherwise qualified individuals are not discriminated against because of a disability. That said, once a student has access to that education, it's up to the student to do the success part. And so for example, if a student doesn't pass his or her classes, it doesn't necessarily mean that the student is entitled to more services. Definitely, if a student is struggling, they should connect back with the Disability Support Services Office, adjust their plan, adjust their request as they need to. But there is a fundamental difference in the mission of those two types of support. A couple of other differences in high school, the schools are responsible for identifying students with disabilities and making sure that they get plugged into the right supports. But in college, it's different. It is the student's responsibility to self-identify, to submit the paperwork that would be necessary or the documentation that would be necessary to be eligible for services, and to request those services. The changes also impact the role of the guardian. In high school, guardians are required to be informed of their students' educational process. They're generally involved and encouraged to be involved in a student's planning and determination of the supports that are needed. But in high school, that's a little bit different. In high schools, the school will communicate directly with families about a student's performance and a student's progress, and parents often communicate directly with the schools. But in college, that changes. In college, by law, university professionals are not allowed to share educational records or information with families or with others without written consent by the student. And FERPA that I mentioned earlier is the law that comes into play there. And so the communication most often goes through the student, between the parent and the school. And so that's just something to know and something to plan for as you plan to move into the college setting. And so you've got a situation where a lot of times families have, for 12 years and more than 12 years, a lot of times been very involved in that child's, in their students' decision-making, in their students' planning, in their direct interaction with their schools. And that does not mean that parents can't still provide strong support for their students. They can, and many do. It just looks a little bit different when the student is in college. I'll talk a little bit about the general steps for getting started with a disability support services office. Now, this will vary from campus to campus, but just in general, once a student is admitted to a college or university, they can contact the Disability Support Services Office and submit documentation of a disability, and then register. It's usually a form that they will submit to be considered by the Disability Support Services Office. The professionals in that office will review all of those materials and generally schedule an intake meeting with a student where they can have a conversation about their learning profile, what accommodations they think that they may need, and kind of start talking through that process with the students. Once the Disability Support Services Office has determined what accommodations the student's eligible for and which ones they think that they'll need, they'll generate a letter that the student, it might be a hard copy letter, it might be some other sort of documentation, but the student will then provide that documentation to their instructors or anybody that they feel like needs to know about their accommodations. And that'll happen each semester and each year as the student moves forward. So I'll share a couple of transition tips about working with Disability Support Services Office, and I really can't emphasize these enough. Tip one is just very important. Just encouraging you to take the time to explore what is available through Disability Support Services on every college that you're considering. You would be amazed at how many students don't take advantage of this. I think nationally, the estimate is that only about 25 to 35% of students who had received supports for disabilities in high school actually ever register with the Disability Support Services Office in the college environment. So that means 75% of students who would probably be eligible for these resources don't take advantage of that. And so we just strongly encourage you to take the steps to utilize those supports and resources that are available to you. Also would suggest doing that as early as possible, maybe even before you ever get to campus that first semester. Disability Support Services offices are notoriously understaffed. They're swamped during the first part of the semester. So the earlier you can start that dialogue, the better. I was talking with a transition specialist a couple of years ago who said that's one of the main things that she does before her students graduate. While they're sitting in her office, she looks up the number of the Disability Support Services office for them and says, hands them the phone and says, all right, make that call. Go ahead and break the ice, get to know the people in that office, and go ahead and start the process of submitting your materials. I think, there are several reasons a lot of students don't take advantage of those services. We hear several of them. One of the things we hear from students all the time is, I don't want to register with Disability Support Services Office. I have felt stigma associated with having a learning difference. I have been embarrassed about it. I may have even been teased all through elementary, middle school, and high school. And I don't have to tell anybody when I go to college. And I would like for that stigma to just go away. And I just don't want to. I'm embarrassed. I'm ready to not have that stigma. And we actually hear that a lot. And I will say, this isn't perfect. This doesn't happen every single time, but I would say the vast majority of our students have told us, you know what, that just is not a thing in college. The stigma does fade quite a bit. A lot of times learning differences are just seen as just any part of the natural human variability that we all have. And so that the students commonly say they don't feel anywhere near the level of stigma that they may have felt before they got to college. Some students say, you know what, I don't want to register with Disability Support Services right away. Glad it's there. I know it's there. I'll register if I need it, but I really want to try it on my own first. And while that sounds good, that doesn't often work out as well as students might hope it would. Because a lot of times if you reach a place where you feel like, oh no, I need those disability support services, and you're well into the semester, sometimes it's kind of late to turn things around and to kind of dig out of a hole of low grades if that's what's been accumulating. So we really do recommend the opposite. Go ahead, get registered, be proactive, use all the resources that are available to you, and then fade them if you find that you don't need them all. And that sort of does lead me to sort of the next thing we hear a lot from students in the next transition tip. A lot of students will say, look, I needed accommodations a while back. I needed them as a freshman. I needed them in middle school. I used to use accommodations, but I've weaned myself off those supports, and I don't need them anymore, so I don't need to register for them in the college environment. And I think it's true that a lot of students, as they become more confident and skilled in different educational settings, they're able to fade some of those accommodations and support, become more independent, use different compensatory strategies. But I would encourage students to think about the fact that the college environment is a really different educational setting than the one that they're leaving. And really, as that third bullet point said, consider requesting accommodations based on the time when they needed them most. The most intensive supports they've needed, those might be the accommodations that they want to request at first in college. And then as you get more comfortable and more confident and more successful in the college setting, you'll know when which ones can go and which ones that you need to keep. And then I'll say the last thing we hear from students around this a lot of times is I'm just nervous. You know, for all my life, my parents have advocated for me, my teachers have advocated for me, and now you're saying I've got to go to the Disability Support Service office myself and talk about my learning profile, talk about the accommodations I need. That's scary. And I think that's important to keep in mind and legitimate. One of the things that I'd like to share with you is that in the transition curriculum, the college-bound transition curriculum in Module 4, one of the things we have there are role plays and scenarios, and the encouragement for students to practice having those conversations with their families, with their parents, with their guidance counselors, with their teachers, so that the first time you hear yourself explaining about your learning profile and how you study and what you need to be successful is not when you're standing in front of that first college professor or standing in the Disability Support Services office. Go ahead and practice that and kind of get those words that you want to use comfortable for yourself. Also, I'll point you to the College Star Conference recordings on this topic. On day 1 of the session, 3 great folks from Marist College really unpack the topic of working with Disability Support Services office in a lot more detail than I have here. And so just to, kind of to close out this topic, I will point you to some accommodations that are typically available and unavailable in the college environment. The ones that are on the screen right now are typically things that are not going to be appropriate to request in the college environment. High schools do have a little bit more flexibility than colleges in terms of what we can modify in terms of the learning experience. Anything that would fundamentally change a curriculum or a class is typically not going to be approved as an appropriate accommodation for college. In college, we can also often change how things are done, but not necessarily what is required. So for an example, let's say you're a student in college and you have a test to take. You might be eligible to have somebody read that test to you. We might be able to request an accommodation to take that test in a distraction-free environment, to have extra time to take the test. So all of those are actually pretty typical accommodations, but what we generally can't do is provide a different version of the test, say take a shorter test, have different resources like maybe have a word bank or a formula sheet handy during the test. If that's not available for everybody, that might not be an option. And can't use different grading standards a lot of times on a test. And of course, there are exceptions. You may find situations in colleges where those things are possible, but they're not typically available in the college environment. On the other hand, these are common accommodations that students request in the college setting. Some of them might look familiar. Extended time, reduced distraction testing, having things read aloud, using scratch paper, bubbling assistance for those wonderful scantrons. And so these are pretty common accommodations. Again, things differ from campus to campus, but these are often what a student with a learning difference is going to need, and they are available. I want to take a minute just to pause. I know folks often bring questions around disability support services and what's available and maybe not available. Just to see, Kathy, if anybody has dropped any questions in the chat about disability support services, or give you a moment to do that now.
Yeah, absolutely. And please do keep putting the questions in the chat. I'm taking them down, and I'm happy to post those. There are a couple, Sarah, that seem to pertain to the topics you've covered so far. You mentioned ADA and 504 as kind of the governing laws. What recommendations do you have for a college student as they go in to sort of advocate for themselves? And as you said, that's not an easy thing for every student to go in and do, but maybe they come up against a university disability services program that seems to be pushing back more than giving. Do you know what I mean? In other words, they believe you're allowed to have certain things based on ADA, but it doesn't really come close to what maybe you had. And you've kind of touched on this. What are steps? What are, if I'm the student sitting there in that chair, what do I do with that?
Yeah. So I'll just say off the top of my head a few different things. And one thing that this prompted me, I'll back up a little bit that I forgot to say is, I think we do need to recognize that it's an intimidating process. And so, practicing, like I said, is important, but also remembering that for the most part, the people in the Disability Support Services Office are accustomed to nervousness. They know that. They guide you through the process, and they're ready for that. And so I can't speak for absolutely every office. But for the most part, folks in Disability Support Services, our offices are definitely not trying to keep students from having accommodations. Like that's not what they're trying to do. But they do need documentation to be able to justify the accommodations that they approve. And so I think the first thing I would recommend is just kind of keeping that well, the first thing I would recommend is expectations, thinking about expectations. What happened in high school does not transfer to college. And it's not really appropriate to expect that it will. That legislation ends, and then you're moving into kind of start a different chapter in college. So it's not necessarily that Disability Service Office isn't doing something they're supposed to if you don't have access to everything you did while you were in college. That is a thing to consider. But then, there are times where there are differences in terms of what a student feels that they need or should be eligible for in a Disability Services Office initially feels that they can approve. I would say, as always, the first thing to do is just continue that dialogue and work through that as much as you can with the Disability Support Services Office. Go there, be there, provide documentation, have dialogue. Go back, have another dialogue, and continue that conversation. If you feel like you're just at an impasse, every university has a system to express, disagreement with, the services that were provided, and so certainly take that step if you need to. And every campus is going to have that.
And another person asked. I guess they had looked into the STEPP program. And while they're super excited that something like that even exists, it looks like the STEPP program is still requiring the SAT where it looks like that standardized testing requirement is not going on in North Carolina?
Yeah, we pretty much pattern with what ECU is doing around the SAT. So there may be some language up on our website about that, but we go with what ECU is requiring. So if they're not requiring the SAT, we don't either.
Okay, super. And then if there is a school that a student wants to apply to that maybe is going to require the SAT, you know, they often offer SAT prep through a high school, or, you know, there are certainly expensive private situations, I guess, you can get into to prepare for those. But what is the best way to prepare for a student with a learning difference?
I don't know that I have a great answer to that. I think the biggest thing we recommend is take that test multiple times and start taking it early if you can, and learn from your experience. And then you know how to more strategically tap into study resources and which sort of sections you need to build up on, and you know, look for campuses that take a super score, you know, and try to build that score is one thing that we recommend that students do. There are so many resources out there and good ones. I don't have any, Kathy, though, that I just specifically point to as better than others.
No, I think that's fantastic advice, actually, the multiple times, and really using that information to focus your studying and what you're really going to hone in on as you take it again. I think that's great. That's fantastic. You mentioned that you have to have the documentation. So a couple of questions came up. How recent or you know, does that documentation need to be? And do college students need to repeat that evaluation, the psych ed evaluation, every 3 years as they have in the past?
Okay, the first part's going to feel like a non-answer, I know, because it basically it depends in terms of how recent it is. So my recommendation would be, if you can have relatively recent documentation, and by relatively recent, I do mean within the high school years, you know, within the past 3 years or so, then do. You know, the easier you can make it on the Disability Support Services Office to understand the profile of you, if you're a student, or your student if you're a parent, as an adult learner, the better. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get a picture of the student as an adult learner and determine, are they going to need accommodations to access major life, you know, education experiences, and so using a psychoeducational evaluation from 4th grade makes that a little hard, and so I mean, that's just, you know, it's good to have a more recent one. Some school now, you know, by law, there is a little bit of flexibility on how recent that needs to be, and so some universities can look kind of for a pattern. And so let's say maybe you don't have one from the past 3 years, but maybe you got one 4 years old or 5 years old, but you also have multiple evaluations that can show a pattern over the students' educational experiences and multiple testing sessions. Some schools might be able to look at that. So while there's a little bit of flexibility on what they can use and how recent it is, different Disability Support Services offices are going to have different levels of confidence depending on, you know, what they have in their hand. So there is some flexibility, but I always recommend trying to get something during the high school years at least.
Okay.
In terms of having that done again while they're in college, I don't think that's an issue. Once you're established with Disability Support Services Office, you can connect with them each year, keep a relationship with them, and at that point they're watching you learn and grow as an adult learner. They've got what they need right there in the post-secondary records or transcript, things like that. But what they need is that initial information to know how to best serve you as a student in college. Now, check with each individual office, but that's in general.
Okay. So I got 2 other questions that I captured from the chat, and I'm going to hold on to those in case you touch on those later on. But thank you for that, Sarah.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. All right, we'll sort of switch gears and start talking a little bit about just some comparing and contrasts of differences between high school and college. And I'll sprinkle in a little bit of tips throughout the way, hopefully, but definitely keep dropping your questions in. And one of the things I want to emphasize, I feel like there's a lot of comparisons coming up, but one of the things I want to emphasize is not to be overwhelmed by these comparisons. Instead, just sort of listen and think as you go through them in terms of, oh, that's something we could talk about. That's something we could start working on. And also, to, keep in mind sometimes, in some instances, college becomes a place where students with learning differences can really shine. A lot of students, because they do learn differently while they're going through grade school, you really have to develop an in-depth knowledge of themselves and their own learning profiles and what study habits work for them, and they have to build a strong work ethic and they're experienced with the need to apply grit to learning situations. And sometimes, honestly, that actually leaves them better prepared to succeed in college compared to students for whom everything might have come easily. So I do these comparisons just to get your juices flowing and get you thinking in advance, but definitely not to intimidate you. I'll also share that the college-bound transition curriculum, module 1, goes into this high school versus college comparison in a ton of depth, a lot more than I'll do tonight. And I'll also point you to those College Star Conference recordings. On those, you'll find a series of mini sessions. And in those sessions, great people from Appalachian State University, ECU, the SALT Center at the University of Arizona, Erie County Community College, Notre Dame, just really talk about some of these topics in a lot more detail, and it'll give you chances to hear from all sorts of different environments and also all sorts of different perspectives. But I'll start with probably one of our most popular topics, just daily life. I mean, there's just day to day, there are so many differences in the college setting and in the high school setting. Just starting real basic, in high school, a lot of times you're surrounded by fewer students on a smaller campus, where in college you're surrounded most often, all colleges are different, but by a lot more students and on bigger campuses where you're having just lots more opportunities to connect with all sorts of people who have common interests as you. And now you have to make an effort to make those connections, but there are tons of opportunity for that. In high school, there's a lot more structure, a lot more supervision and accountability built right into the day-to-day student experience. Students don't have a lot of experience or a lot of responsibility a lot of times for kind of determining what they do moment to moment each day. In college, that changes drastically, and we'll talk a lot about this later, but there's a lot less structure, a lot less supervision, a lot less accountability day to day, leaving students with the responsibility for sort of organizing their day and planning that out. In high school, there are fewer activities and organizations most of the time and ways for exploring different interests. In college, there are tons of activities and organizations and ways to get involved in different things. In high school, students are generally living with their families, often they'll have their own room or share a room with a sibling, but in those environments, when conflicts occur, they're going to happen within the context of long-standing close relationships. In college, that changes. Students are often living with one or more roommates, someone they haven't known for a very long time. They still have access to their family support, but they may have to make a little more effort to tap into that. If conflicts occur, it may be, without that strong pre-existing relationship, and they may not know the people very well that they're trying to navigate through that with. Daily living is a big one. Most high school students don't have extensive responsibility for like household management and daily living skills. Families provide a lot of that, but for college students, they're going to need to start taking on responsibility for all their needs and daily tasks like personal care, hygiene, health and wellness, things like that. So in the college bound transition curriculum that I talked about, we've got a whole module on that. Module 8 is about campus living and exploring some of these areas of daily life that might be new to the college student, but these are great things to start working on now and to start practicing in advance and playing around with so that they don't feel like such a culture shock once you get to college. And that's my transition tip on that: practice. Anything that you'll need to do for yourself in college, and you can go ahead and start working on now, will serve you well. And so, you know, things like basic cooking and nutrition, doing your own laundry, you know, practicing that. We've got in module 5 in the transition curriculum, it's focused on developing and maintaining healthy routines. And so it goes through some of these, you know, sleep, eating regularly, and keeping those good rhythms, those good healthy rhythms in your life. Money management. Module 6 in the transition curriculum focuses on finances as it relates to college and kind of thinking ahead about managing your money. Keeping up with medication, you know, start thinking about that sort of thing, and how am I gonna make sure that I stay on track with things like that in college? Where am I gonna get refills? That sort of thing. Scheduling appointments. Using alarm clocks and reminders, and start kind of managing time yourself, those sorts of things. Making connections with new people from the diverse groups. That's going to be just a wonderful opportunity in college, but it's things that you can go ahead and start doing now, and finding new interests. I'll talk a lot about time management later, but those are great things, practical, hands-on things that you can start practicing on your own now. Another topic that's kind of a big transition point for students is communication. The first one, email, I can't emphasize enough. You know, high schools are going to vary in their primary way of communicating with students and families, but many of them don't use email to the extent that a college will. Right now, anyway, email is the primary way that many colleges are going to communicate with students. Students are expected to use the email account that's provided by their school. They're expected to check it often. They're expected, and they're held accountable for information that is communicated by email. A recent example that I can think of is a good friend of mine called me not too long ago as we changed into the semester. Her student she's in the middle of her first year of college, and she said, "What just happened? My student's schedule just got completely dropped, and I just found out it's because we didn't pay her tuition, but we never got a bill, you know." And when they checked back, they realized that the student did get an email that about the deadline to pay for tuition, and that information was posted on the website, but the parents didn't receive a bill or any information, and a lot of colleges, they won't. That information is communicated to the student by email, and the student's expected to check that email and relay that to the important people, in this case, parents who are paying their bill. So, you know, it's just incredible. It's important to make sure that students get accustomed to monitoring that email and monitoring it often, and they know who and when to share the relevant information with when it comes through their email. In high school, a lot of teachers, most teachers, are going to communicate important information to their students, you know, face-to-face, while they're in class. And in college, a lot of instructors will do that, but a lot of the instructors will also use email or the school's online learning system like Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard to communicate key information about their courses. And they may or may not say anything in class. So students are expected to check all the different resources to get updates and information that are pushed to them either through email or things like the learner management system by their instructors. Also in high school, teachers are usually kind of present throughout the school day, and students might be able to check in with them between classes or before and after school. And in college, some instructors are on campus full-time too, but sometimes they're splitting their time among their teaching as well as their research or field work, committees and things like that. So students are expected to sort of think in advance, make appointments, or try to connect with instructors during their office hours. Also in high school, the schools are usually going to keep parents informed about their students' progress. You know, they're going to let them know about grades, about their academic progress, attendance, disciplinary information, that sort of thing. But in college, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act prevents colleges from doing that, again, without express written permission from the student. But even if the school does have permission to communicate with the parents, a lot of times they're not going to initiate that type of contact. So it's really important for students and their parents to keep those strong lines of communication open. And sometimes that means making a plan for that in advance. So that's a good conversation for families and students to have. And sort of the second bullet on this page, have a conversation with one another. You know, parents, talk to your students about what you expect and what you hope in terms of how often they'll communicate with you, when, how, and sort of what that rhythm is going to be, and make sure those, and students similarly communicate with your parents, how often you'd like for them to communicate with you, and kind of get on the same page about a plan for that, and then follow through with that plan so that those lines of communication stay open. Students, I would encourage you to brush up on your written communication skills. And by that, I mean practicing sending emails that use kind of a professional tone. Teachers don't usually like it when they get emails that are full of abbreviations and emojis and kind of read like a casual text message. You're going to want to make sure you're communicating in such a way that makes a positive impression and really communicates what you're trying to communicate. In the transition curriculum that I keep pointing you to, Module 7 is all about communication. And it's probably one of my favorite modules. In that module are actually templates, practice exercises, really practical tips for how to do things like write an email or write a thank you note. And it's a great place to practice with thank you notes coming up with college graduation, high school graduation and things like that. So there's a lot of good information in that module so that you can brush up on those skills. And parents, as I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of ways you can provide great support for your students. And this will be a good time to make a plan for that. One of the things that I did, that my husband and I did when our son was in college is we scheduled fill in the gaps conversations with him, because what we found, I don't know, I feel kind of bad about this, but we found that when he went to college, if we went long periods of time without hearing from him, sometimes in the absence of hearing how things are going or what he's doing or how his grades are going, we sometimes would jump to the conclusion that things weren't going well. That like we would just assume that because he wasn't telling us about all these things that he was doing, that he wasn't doing them. And that just wasn't always the case. So we would schedule these regular fill in the gap conversations, let him fill in the gap for us so that we weren't making assumptions and that we were always on the same page about how things are going. And students, I do encourage you to communicate with your parents, keep them in the loop, talk to them regularly. You know, going home for Christmas is not usually when parents want a bad surprise and when you want to be giving your parents a bad surprise if things aren't going well. So keep them in the loop and let them be there for you and supporting you. And if they are going well, let them celebrate with you. Another kind of category is academic expectations. It was a big adjustment. High school in general is kind of a learning environment where teachers kind of take responsibility for ensuring that students are learning and progressing as they should be. College is a learning environment where students are responsible for making sure that they're learning all of the relevant material, making the progress that they need to make, and then when they're struggling, that they're tapping into resources that are available there to help them. In high school, students are usually told what to do. They're monitored to ensure they do it, and they're given frequent feedback on their performance. That might happen in some college classes, but in general, the level of rigor, the expectation for producing high quality work independently and using critical thinking skills are often a little higher than they are in the high school setting. So students are really expected to take responsibility for finding out what to do and following through with their course tasks and seeking support when needed. In high school, the curriculum's pretty pretty rigid, and graduation requirements are fairly similar for everyone. In college, the curriculum and required coursework is going to differ from college to college, and often within a college from major to major. So that's exciting because there's a lot of different opportunities for exploration, but it also means that students are responsible for knowing their specific graduation requirements, for selecting courses that align with that those graduation requirements, and they're going to have support by their advisor. But they are expected to stay on top of that sort of thing. So those are some important differences in terms of the academic experience. So I would say the transition tip for that is, really do dig into that as you're exploring different schools. Include curriculum requirements is one thing that you're looking into. Start thinking about the majors that you might be interested in, and what kind of coursework is going to be required. What will be required to get into the major, to be admitted to the major? Do they require a standardized test? Are there certain expectations that you might want to be preparing for? Don't worry if you don't know exactly what you want to major in, but you can start to explore different options and maybe. And the transition curriculum that I've been talking about, Module 2, is all about planning for academic success. And that'll be a good module to work through as you start thinking about different curriculum options. All right, this is the big one, time management. I think almost every tip I can share with you tonight boils down in some way to time management and being intentional about planning and thinking ahead day to day. In high school, the school generally generates the schedule for students and provides structure and guidance for how students are going to spend their time during the school day. But in college, students create their own schedule and they manage their own time. So much less of the day is structured for students. And so a lot of times students, when they get to college for the first time, just feel, this sense of, oh my goodness, all this newfound free time. And that can be exciting, and it can be empowering, and it can be freeing, but it can also be overwhelming when you have to figure out right now, how do I harness all this free time and develop really productive academic routines that keep me progressing like I need to. And so these are things to consider. In high school, students spend about 30 hours a week in class. Most learning takes place in class. Definitely some study time is usually needed outside of class, but a lot of times it's not hours and hours and hours of study time. In college, students only spend about 12 to 16 hours of their week actually in class, and a lot of learning takes place outside of class, interacting with course materials, applying those course materials, studying, and using their resources. So a lot of time is required outside of class for students to succeed. A lot of places advise about 3 hours of study time for every 1 hour that you're in class in college. So early on, students are going to need to be intentional about finding a balance. And one of the things we encourage in the STEPP program is heavy use of a planner and thinking ahead about, all right, let me see if I can harness my kind of work day, 8 to 5, 9 to 4, the daylight hours, and get as much studying and plan for as much of my schoolwork as possible during that time, and really plan it out. So I'm staying on top of all my classes. But what that does is it leaves students with time in the evening and weekends. I mean, they're still studying in the evening and weekends, but it leaves them with a good bit of free time, and not just free time, but guilt-free free time, so that they can go out and enjoy all the other things that college has to offer outside of the classroom. And there's a lot of that, and we want students to find a balance. So, some things you can start practicing now, even if you don't really need to so much in the high school environment. Go ahead and start practicing mapping out your day, planning ahead. How are you going to use your time? And sort of going ahead and start budgeting your study time so that you're breaking long-term assignments down in small tasks and planning to work on them a little bit every day until they're completed. Working on that kind of self-discipline to break your studying down and break down tests and study them gradually instead of kind of cramming right before the test is due. Start paying attention to how long things take, right? How long does it take to read a chapter for me? Do I have the sort of stamina to go through a whole chapter, or do I need to break it up? Because those are the kinds of things you're going to want to start building into your planner when you're in college, making sure you're allocating time for the different things that work for you when you study. And I think that's one of the bigger adjustments that students experience is just, how long do things take for me? Teachers, instructors, and course expectations. I mean, we've talked a little bit about how the mission of each different educational setting is a little bit different, and the environment and expectations are going to be different. And the same is true for interacting with instructors. And I want to emphasize here that just because interactions with instructors might be different a little bit in high school and college, again, neither is better, neither is worse. They're just different. And I work with in the Office for Faculty Excellence. ECU has about 2,000 faculty members, and the vast majority of them are some of those passionate, caring, hardworking teachers that I know. So there are people here, and instructors are incredibly eager to work with students, but it does take some effort on the students' part that may not be what they're accustomed to. Just some things to think about, and some examples. In high school, all teachers who work in high school environments have been trained as educators. They've been taught specific methods for teaching students. A lot of times they'll adapt their teaching style to the needs of certain students who are having difficulty learning material. They might use a lot of different instructional methods to convey materials to students. And that may happen in college as well. It's amazing how many just expert and amazing instructors there are in colleges all across the nation. But do keep in mind that instructors are experts in their field. They're chemists, they're psychologists, they're nurses. Many college instructors have never been taught how to teach. That's not training they've had. And so students who have difficulty whose learning profile is not exactly a match for an instructor's instructional techniques might need to take some extra steps in the background to try new things and to learn the materials and access the materials in different ways, and may need to take some extra steps to develop a relationship with that instructor so that that instructor can help them learn and progress. High school classes are usually smaller, usually don't have more than about 30, 35 students. Teachers often get to know their students really well. Class attendance is mandatory and monitored. So there are both direct and indirect consequences when a student doesn't show up for class. In college, that changes. Class sizes may be anywhere from 5 to 500 students. Instructors may or may not be able to get to know each student in depth. And attendance policies are going to vary by instructors. Some instructors do require attendance and monitor it. In some classes, though, there may be no specific attendance policy, and attendance may not even be monitored, but there are always indirect consequences in terms of a student not coming to class regularly. There's going to be information they don't know, activities they aren't able to engage in, and negative consequences are sort of more long-term. So the transition tip around this is just sort of think about getting ready to make the most of different class environments. A lot of students before they get to college are really nervous about those large classes that some universities have. But what we've found is after students get here, it's really not that much of a problem. A lot of times large classes are set up especially well for students with learning differences to succeed. They also offer great opportunities for students to stand out in a really positive way. Instructors who teach large classes are usually just craving opportunities to get to know their students, and students who make an effort to make that happen are usually perceived really positively. And also just real practical things. Our students tell us that some of the best strategies are just showing up early, sitting near the front of the classroom, If allowed, record the class so that you can listen to it again, make those connections with the instructor, set up study groups, things like that. But start figuring out, all right, what strategies am I going to use? Start checking into what other students do and thinking ahead about how to be successful in that environment. Also, starting to expand your toolbox of study skills. Think about different ways to learn and study information. And while you're still in, you still have your low stakes, and it's a low stakes environment, and you have your comfortable support network, start playing with new types of studying and expand your toolkit. And then finally, I think this is the last contrast, is just around grades, assignments, and tests. In high school, students are often going to have a lot of different assignments, homeworks, quizzes, tests, papers, extra credit sometimes, things like that to really build their final grade. But a lot of times in college, now that may happen in college, but in some classes, a grade is composed only of a few assignments, maybe a few tests and or papers, and schedules vary. So sometimes students will have a lot of assignments all at one time. So again, it takes that good advanced planning to really stay on top of things. The type of studying sometimes needs to be different. In high school, students might be expected to reproduce what they were taught in class in ways that are very similar to how they were taught. So they might have problems on a test that are very similar to the ones shown in class. They may have detailed study guides, know exactly what they'll be tested on. They may have review sessions and things like that. Those things might happen in college, but they don't always. A lot of times tests require students to apply information or solve problems in unique and different ways from maybe the way it was presented in class. Instructors often offer review sessions before a test, but students are expected to come to those sessions having looked at the material and kind of bringing some questions and things that they want clarification on. Many instructors do provide study guides and things like that for a test, but they're not always explicit in terms of exactly what's going to be on the test. Sometimes it might be a list of topics, and students need to pull from their notes, from their text, from their lecture, and things like that to pull together what to study for that topic for a test. So before going to college, start thinking about those things. I've already touched on some of those things, but looking into what study resources are available in college, a college that you're exploring. Are there mentoring opportunities? Are there coaching opportunities? Are there people that you can connect with to help you know how to be strategic in your studying? And go ahead and start looking for those and tapping into them. There are a lot of resources in the transition curriculum, and especially though for this topic, in the College Star Conference recordings that you might find helpful. Also, I do want to point you to also in the college-bound transition curriculum is a module on technology. And for this topic, that's also a good place to explore different types of technology that might help with your studying, that might be useful when producing assignments and taking tests. So that'll be a good resource for you there. All right, so that's all I have in terms of comparisons of high school and college. I want to pause for a minute and Kathy, see if anybody had dropped any questions in the chat.
A lot. I see that we're coming up on time, so that was perfect timing. Okay, so I'm going to launch into the ones. You've talked a lot basically about executive function / study skills in this last piece, which I have really appreciated. One of the things we share with middle and high school students who come to our study skills classes after school is that there is no accommodation that exists that will take the place of their time and their effort. And so it's really important for them to know, it's going to be work, but there's supports that can be helpful. Can you talk about, you mentioned the module as part of the STEPP program, but are there tutors maybe in a tutoring center that focus really specifically on this for, students who just sort of get underwater and just need some help sort of getting that all together?
Yeah, a lot of just general student support offices will provide. A couple things come to mind with what you said. A lot of the short answer is yes. A lot of campuses will provide coaching and things like that to help students, again, wrangle that newfound free time in a way that's really constructive. And so I would encourage students to find those resources and tap into them. A lot of colleges also offer a course. It's a freshman seminar course. It's called something different at every college, but it's like a how to be a college student course. In some colleges that's mandatory, but in most colleges, I think it's an option for students. And I would strongly encourage students to sign up for that course. It's usually a 1 hour course. It's not usually all that time intensive, but it's one of those courses that you get out of it what you put into it. But it is an excellent, one of the main topics is going to be covered in a course like that is helping students to kind of get their head around that kind of thinking and that kind of planning.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're already aware that there's a student who is expressing resistance or don't need or whatever to services, is there a way to help them understand? I mean, should they look at a class syllabus and understand this is, wow, okay, this is a lot, or, talk with a current college student who might, what do you suggest to help them really, truly understand?
I think those are all great ideas. And I think the timing for doing that kind of thing, would be the earlier, the better. So let's say you're admitted to a college and, you're struggling with, thinking about that sort of thing, tapping, over the summer before you go, during orientation or early in the weeks of school, when school starts, check in with your Dean of Students office or the tutoring center or the coaching center and sit down and say, all right, talk real to me. What is it going to take? What am I going to need to do to stay on top of things and to be successful? And a lot of times students will take advantage of those supports and do better than they ever thought they could. I do think building in accountability is very important. So if they're not in a highly structured program like something like STEPP, finding ways to build in accountability with a peer, with a roommate, with a grad student, with a parent, with a family. Sometimes the parents just want to be parents, find somebody else maybe that they can check in with and just somebody keeping them on top of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to piggyback on that, you mentioned earlier coursework requirements will certainly differ between curricular programs in college. Any suggestions for a student with a learning disability who finds themselves in a very structured program? And what I mean by that is it's, kind of high rigor mathematics, engineering, something like that. And they come up against a situation where a professor seems resistant to providing accommodations. And I guess that could happen outside of, a highly rigorous program as well. If a student comes up against that, what are steps? What's the next move?
It happens from time to time. I will say it happens rarely. Like I've been at ECU for 24 years and, STEPP's been in place for 15 and it does not happen often, but it does happen from time to time. And I think the first step is absolutely always to, have a dialogue with your instructor, talk to the instructor. I would encourage it to be the student to talk to the instructor. Sometimes as for the parents in the room, it's so easy to want to dive in, but coaching your students and working with them to have that dialogue with the instructor is really important. And doing that multiple times. Right? Persistence and professional, positive self-advocacy. If they just reach an impasse and let's say the Disability Support Services Office has approved an accommodation and the instructor is just not providing it, then the student can go back to the Disability Support Services Office and that office will try to work with the instructor. If that still doesn't work, kind of like I said before, every university has sort of a set of steps the student can take to challenge those decisions and that instructor.
So advocate for yourself with the instructor first. If that doesn't pan out or that feels like a dead end, then disability services.
Yep, that would be the second place.
Oh, that's great. I wanted to ask you a question. It's a little bit of a left turn based on what we've been talking about, but it was a question that came in early on that I thought was really intriguing. I will say, Sarah, this may not be something you've had a lot of experience with, and feel free to say that, but with the stress of navigating online learning and high school during COVID, this parent was considering a gap year for their student and wondered, are you aware of any gap year options for a student with mild dyslexia or ADHD who just, it seems like a break would be a good plan prior to launching back?
Yeah, I don't have anything very helpful on that last part. I don't have good examples of that. I'll be happy to look for some and maybe follow up with you. I will say, I wouldn't be afraid of a gap year. We've had many students come into STEPP who have done that, who have taken a year, maybe taken some classes kind of at home or just completely taken a gap year. I would say definitely stay on top of the transition planning. Like, don't get your head completely out of it if you're planning to go to a university. But sometimes students come in after that experience more mature, more ready. Their appetite is, sort of ready for college in a different way. So that's definitely not a bad thing, to consider. Mm-hmm. Especially after a stressful couple of years, and I think there are more gap programs becoming available because of more interest. I will share, I'm kind of glad they asked that because I want to use the opportunity to say a quick reminder for ECU and for schools all across the nation, reminder for families and students to remember that online instruction and online learning is not the same as COVID courses and courses that were quickly kind of thrown online during a pandemic. So, kind of going forward, if schools are putting out online learning opportunities, most often they're going to be designed for that and a much different experience than we've all had the past couple of years in really challenging times. Everybody just has to make the decision that's right for them in those sorts of settings.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that. American Sign Language as fulfilling the foreign language requirement. Are you aware if North Carolina colleges have a policy they're following with that? Is it case by case?
Yeah, that's more of a high school thing that I know of. Now, I don't want to be, but each major is going to determine what's required for their major. So that's something that I would check in. I don't know of anything statewide. I'll check and let you know if I'm wrong to follow up with folks. But
no, and I was going to make the suggestion too that it's likely a great question for admissions, because I do know that some students with language-based learning differences, it's accepted as their foreign language.
You're talking about for admission. I'm sorry.
Yes,
I thought you were talking about for the college degree. I'm scared to say anything just across the board about that. I think a lot of schools do accept that though for admissions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would check in with the admissions counselor.
Yeah. And another sort of similar services working together kind of question. Does disability services, would they play a role in any way in residential assignments? And let me give you for example, like a single room occupancy for a student with autism or extreme sensory processing differences. Is that just residence services?
No, you would go through disability support services for that.
Okay.
That's where you'd start. Now at each school they may have a different process, but that's where I would start.
Okay. All right, absolutely. And if you wouldn't mind, early on, you touched on some statements about accommodations in terms of grading and the college setting. I wonder if you could just touch on that again. We had a question coming in about wondering if there were any accommodations for grading policies. And the example they gave was, for example, if the exam carries so much weight that it really sort of washes clean some great semester assignment work that happened, and maybe they're not the best test taker or.
Yeah. Nope. I would say that's different school to school, instructor to instructor. So I can't give you an across the board answer for that. But my first thought would be that's not typically something that would be modified for an individual student.
Yeah,
that does not mean you don't have, but I'm telling you, that doesn't mean you don't have a dialogue with the instructor. You know, a lot of times instructors know that their assignments carry a lot of weight, and students who have been in their office working with them, they've seen their work ethic, they know how hard they work, they've seen those assignments, they're not going to forget that when they grade those tests. So that's all the more reason that relationship with the instructor is really important. And that starts on day one. It's hard to like really quickly create a relationship like when that test, you know, grade comes out at the end of the semester. So getting to know those instructors early, and in those transition curriculum materials, there's some tutorials about developing a course progress record. And that's an exercise that's good for the student, but we recommend using that or something like it as that icebreaker with the instructor, you know, early on, just find a way to make a connection, go visit them during their office hours and get to know them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to piggyback on that, then also utilizing those other services that are available really to all students in terms of getting some help with studying, and go ahead and contact disability services if accommodations are needed for testing. Get that in place so that you can set yourself up for success there. Exactly.
I mean, that is as much or even more a part of self-advocacy than, you know, than it's also self-advocacy when you're not getting the accommodations you need and you need to push for that. But the upfront stuff is really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. I see we're sitting right at 8 o'clock. I want to pass on a comment that just came in the chat. This is a fantastic webinar, Dr. Carver Williams. The practical steps, the modules, the transparency for what's going to be helpful and likely required. Grateful for your time and expertise. So thanks a lot.
It's really kind. I appreciate it. And then just good luck. You know, the biggest thing is just don't give up on college too quickly. If it's a goal for yourself, just really work toward that goal and use these resources and reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. I really, really have appreciated you being here, sharing your expertise with us. It was wonderful. And I encourage everyone, if there were pieces you want to hear again, everyone is going to receive the recording of this. So, you know, watch pieces again, share with your student if they weren't able to be a part of it tonight. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Hill if we can help your high school student with executive function skills. We have online courses that parents can take a look at and even watch with their student if at all helpful. So don't hesitate to reach out, and thank everyone for being here tonight and being with us here at Hill. Really appreciate it. Good night.